Hi, everyone. Welcome to the UFV Career Panel, Opportunities and Critical Skills for Careers with Global Development and Social Justice Organizations. Thank you for being here today. My name is Holly Jansen, and I am currently in my fourth year of Global Development Studies at UFV. Before we begin the discussion, I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous territories from which we are meeting today. With gratitude, I am tuning in today from the unceded territory of the Stolo First Nation. It is important that we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and present, and that we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. As we are meeting virtually today, it is likely that we are all joining this discussion from a variety of territories. Please take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous lands that you are on, and please feel free to share it in the chat.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much to our panelists who are here with us today. My name is Gitanjali Gill, and I'm an assistant professor in global development studies here at the University of the Fraser Valley. And I would, with gratitude, like to acknowledge that I'm situated on the unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. And I have the pleasure of introducing our three panelists. We've got Zasha, who is a policy director and gender specialist with the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation, based in Vancouver. We have Cassandre Pérusse, who's the assistant director of international programs at the Justice Education Society in Vancouver. And we have Taylor Keeley, who's the food justice supervisor at Archway Community Services, as well as being a UFV Global Development Studies alum, and Archway's based in Abbotsford. So welcome, everybody. So what we'll do today is feel free in the audience to start, as panelists start speaking. You can start to put some questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So I'm going to start by Holly and I introducing a few questions and topics to the panelists, but hopefully we'll have some time at the end to take up some of your own questions in the audience. So I wanted to first start by asking our three panelists, and maybe I'll put this question to Zasha first, followed by Cassandre and then Taylor. My first question is really just to ask you all to reflect upon and to tell us a bit more about your current work as well as your career path. What has essentially led you to your current position, and how you got involved in your work, and why you were interested to work for a social justice or global development sector organization, and also what you find fulfilling about your work. So maybe I'll pass it on to Zasha first.
Thank you for that interesting question. So my name is Zasha, and I'm speaking to you from the beautiful traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam peoples in what is known today as Gibsons on the Sunshine Coast. So I'm currently working as a policy director and gender specialist at BCCIC. My day-to-day work includes internal policy development, external or outward-facing policy analysis related to provincial, federal, and international policy frameworks, specifically referring to the Sustainable Development Goals, gender equality, and women's empowerment. I am also responsible for report writing, developing policy briefs around multi-stakeholder collaboration. I also regularly engage in consultations with diverse stakeholders, including government, CSOs, private sector. I've organized delegations in the past, thankfully, and I'm very grateful for the help that Holly gave us in organizing the Commission on the Status of Women delegation earlier this year. And I engage in a number of different other activities related to our members, such as awareness raising, advocacy, and capacity development. So just taking you back, I'm South African, and growing up in South Africa under an oppressive apartheid regime, I was exposed to systemic racial oppression that intersected with socioeconomic deprivation and social exclusion. And in fact, as a white child or adolescent, I benefited from this regime, and I grew up in a position of power and privilege as a result of the horrendous oppression and just the horrors surrounding me. However, I also grew up in a family where I was exposed to numerous injustices, including gender-based violence, and I observed my mother balance multiple jobs, roles, and dare I say, humiliations, submissions, and victimizations to ensure our economic survival. In this context, I also observed my siblings exhibiting considerable resilience, going on to complete their doctorates and contributing to social justice in their own ways. And at the time, I observed the children who suffered under apartheid taking matters into their own hands to fight against oppression. And I was born just after the Soweto uprising that involved 20,000 school children on the streets raising their fists against Afrikaans education and against this inferior education system, and in which 700 children were killed and 4,000 injured. So with all these forces and experiences, I grew up with a strong belief that children, teenagers, those suffering oppression and deprivation and violence have agency and power to demand change, even within the constraints of systemic oppression and discrimination. So with this in mind, my second master's degree focused on the agency of child soldiers in South America. And then I entered my PhD with an interest in understanding children's agency in relation to sexual exploitation and child trafficking. So even children who are experiencing abuse, children who are forced into prostitution, children who are trafficked across borders, still exhibit agency and make decisions to try and control their lives and effect power in their lives. So as part of my PhD, I actually moved into a children's shelter in South Africa, and I followed children around as they were working on the streets. And this led me to positions with UNICEF, Save the Children and others, in which I designed and coordinated research projects and developed policies related to child trafficking in Central Asia, Southeast Europe, and Southern Africa. So for instance, I lived in Albania for 1.5 years, coordinating a regional child trafficking anti-child trafficking program. I also focused on these thematic issues in projects related to child migration. And eventually I wrote a book about the agency of child refugees. I also branched out into other areas in the field of children's rights and gender equality, working as a consultant, a salaried staff member, and even co-founded an organization with some of my fellow consultants before I joined BCCIC in 2019. So all of this work was inspired by my initial passion for social justice and a really strong desire to listen to the voices of those who, despite the daily stresses that they face, despite the oppression that they experience, their social exclusion, marginalization, and discrimination, they still exercise agency and power to affect change in their own lives. So I'm really, really grateful for my position at BCCIC. I described it in very dry terms earlier on, but I really, in my position, am able to advocate and really advance strong messages around why we need to adopt agentic, appreciative, and decolonial lenses when we're thinking around equity and social justice. And I use this opportunity to connect voices and members across borders and connecting them around domestic and international issues related to the SDGs and gender equality and social justice. So for me, I guess the pathway is about my childhood and that passion that really was born out of my own lived experience. And I think if you ask anyone in the development context why they're working there, they'll have similar stories. There's something that triggered this belief, this fundamental sense of justice from an early age. I hope I didn't go over my 5 minutes, but thank you for that question.
Cassandre, if you'd like to go next.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. So yes, my name is Cassandre Péreuse. I am the Assistant Director of the International Program at Justice Education Society. I am joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, also referred to as Vancouver. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Sasha, for sharing your experience with you. So, you know, as I mentioned, so I work currently at Justice Education Society. So in a nutshell, you know, it's a nonprofit organization. We've been founded in 1989. And basically, so we work in the justice sector. And I would say that our organization works at 2 levels, right? Domestically, we're more focused on like public legal education and information. So really it's about helping British Columbians and Canadians like navigate through the court systems and the legal system. So, you know, we can provide legal aid, legal information. We have a bunch of websites, things like that. We have a youth program to bring kids to court. So it's this idea of like democratizing the courts and the legal system. But internationally, and this is where I work, it's a bit different. So we work mostly in what we call institutional capacity building, and it sounds very dry, but at the end of the day, it's really about, a lot of our work is focused on training justice sector professionals. So for example, and it's the train the trainer model. So we do a lot of trainings for police, a lot of training for prosecutors, for investigators, judges, analysts, and yeah, to strengthen basically the justice systems, because in Canada, although it's flawed here, and a lot of places where we work, there is very, very weak justice systems in place. So we've been oftentimes invited to go down there to organize trainings on specific themes. And so we work mostly in Central America. We have offices in Guatemala, in Honduras, Guyana, and we're opening one in Panama. And so me and the director, we oversee the operational side of things. So, a lot of different things, a lot of like project program management aspect. There's a management aspect, there's an HR aspect to it. But we also do, business development, which is true for a lot of organizations. We do communications. And it's also about like donor compliance and local compliance as well in terms of the law and all that. So that's where I'm at now. But initially, so I did do a bachelor in international development at McGill, actually a Bachelor of Arts. So you are in the right program. There's hope. But it's very theoretical, and I think what really helped me, what was key for me, was doing practical internships. And while I was doing my bachelor's, I did 2 internships that I feel like really shaped and sort of launched the rest of my career path. First was at Equitas, which is the International Human Rights Education Center based in Montreal. And so I was exposed to 120 activists from 60 countries, from Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, people risking their lives every day to really promote human rights. So that was a very humbling experience, my first international and human rights experience. And then I also did an internship in Ganawage, which is a Mohawk territory, with Cardinal Communication, which was a communications agency for First Nations organizations and band councils. And so that was my first, and one of our clients was, for example, the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador. So we prepared United Nations materials for them. And anyways, it was the first experience in the First Nations environment as well, from Ganawage. So that was very interesting. And yeah, so I feel like I also did volunteer work in Peru. So I got involved at a pretty young age in practical experiences which I think have really helped me at a young age build my career and then help me land other jobs. And we'll talk about the skills and whatnot later that helps you. But on a more personal side, and going back to what Sasha said, I think what triggered me and my sort of first contact with injustice, while I was at university, it was kind of clear to me that I wanted to get involved in Indigenous rights, because I was studying international development and we were talking about the politics, social aspects of, low-income countries, middle-income countries. I was thinking, this is crazy because we have such a dark side here. And I knew about this because, I'm settler, but I do have Eastern Cree family that lives in the Bay James area, right? And I'm very close to that family. And so I was exposed to, I knew about residential schools, this is way, before the TRC and all that. So I was just, I didn't understand that people were not aware of this. And, at the time there was not that much awareness and there was still quite some tension. So I was just wondering why people were not protesting with, First Nations or Indigenous groups in the street, demanding these just normal human rights things. And so that's sort of where I my interest got peaked, and just, I'll talk about the rest of later on, but I did work after that for 7 years for an Indigenous organization in Montreal, and they were using, film as a tool, an artistic tool, but also a tool to promote their rights, right? And I was a youth-led organization as well, and I was doing fundraising there, and I think that really, really also shaped my path, and I learned a lot from that experience, and that led me to working at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO for 2 years, and yeah, so everything is sort of connected, and every experience I feel help you for your next experience. So, and hopefully we'll get more chance to talk later about the tips and all that. So that's just a nutshell, but yeah, don't want to overdo it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Cassandra. And Taylor.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Keeley. I'm coming to you this morning from the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. So I'm located in what is called Vancouver, but I work in Abbotsford, which is on the Matsqui and Sumas First Nation territories. So a lot of you are probably wondering what food justice is. So in a nutshell, I can explain that. So there are different branches of food security, and food justice is social justice. So it is looking at the systemic issues of food security as a whole and really breaking it down to being an issue of the system rather than that of an individual. So part of my work with Archway as a community service organization, we are quite large. We operate over 90 programs and have over 400 staff. So we have quite a reach throughout the Fraser Valley. So part of my role was to further connect the different stakeholders that are working in food security throughout Abbotsford to meet and to talk about food and how we can work to create a better food system in the Fraser Valley, as Abbotsford is the agricultural hub of Canada, and we do produce a lot of food going out. So it is really important to look at the different lenses, as we do have over 1,500 temporary foreign workers, and Archway does work with those programs as well. We have a lot of newcomers in Abbotsford and a large South Asian population as well. So it looks at, my role looks at those more human rights based approach to food and looking at securing culturally appropriate food throughout our food programming and ensuring that we are meeting people where they are at. So looking at the ways that people access our food bank and eliminating barriers through that as well. So how I started in this role was a year ago, but I did do a Bachelor's of Arts in Global Development Studies at UFE. But kind of what sparked my journey here into food security work was I did an internship before pursuing education at UFE in Haiti, and I had worked there in an orphanage and doing a bunch of different programming and looking at how orphanages that are run, unfortunately, by white-bodied and mainly Christian organizations do leave children assimilated or not part of the actual culture. So it was looking at how you could reintegrate children back into their culture. So that really inspired me to look at the complexity of being white and privileged and how international work could be implicated and how, we could really change that. So yeah, I pursued global development studies, and kind of down the way, I was able to do an internship with the Center for International Forestry Research. And it was at the beginning of COVID, so it was a virtual internship, but I was able to work around the world with different scientists and looking at food security and the different implications between COVID-19, climate change, and how that all related as well. So it's been quite a journey, but in my own personal life, being a student at UFE, you obviously can be financially strained. So I did go through the experience of dealing with food insecurity and what that was, and even growing up. So I've always had a passion for food and that access for people. So with that passion for community development, I was able to apply for this role. And I actually had done in my GDS 400 seminar class, we did an evaluation for this food hub work for Archway. So I was able to learn about all the great work that was being done, and I was really passionate about that. And the opportunity came to apply, and I was actually able to get the position. So it's been really great working here for a year and really working to change the way that Archway looks at food programming throughout the Fraser Valley, but also advocating for these justice, for more food justice and social justice rights-based approaches. So we're working with the City of Abbotsford and other stakeholders to establish a food policy council. And I'm also working with the Food and Agricultural Institute at UFE to develop research. So we will be releasing a food asset map of the Fraser Valley and what that looks like. And we're also leading a lived experience table workshop. So now we are able to connect different community members together, and they are able to share their experiences of food insecurity, the gaps that they're seeing in programming, and what is being done right. So this will allow us to bring everyone together and really see people that experience food insecurity as the context experts. So this will help with the development of our community food hub that Archway is developing, which will have a commercial kitchen, community food programming, educational workshops, and things like that. So we're hopefully having that opened within the next year, but we're really looking forward to working with these lived experience tables to really help inform our programming. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. So from your own experiences in this sector, what skills do you feel are critical for students to learn in order to access jobs and to do well working in this sector? And what skills did you wish you had learned before embarking on your work? Or what skills have you learned or used in your job? Sasha, if you'd like to start, you can go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks, Holly. I'd just like to shout out to Taylor there. That comment about those experiencing food security as being context experts is just really, really incredible. And that's a fantastic way of conceptualizing new projects. So fantastic. So I guess the main skill in my mind is the ability to translate the passion and commitment that you have, which, for instance, I spoke about earlier, was really stemming from my own background, my own childhood and experiences in South Africa, but how to translate that into demonstrable actions. So something you can demonstrate and something you can communicate. So I discussed this at length with the executive director, Anne Kath, and we really feel that this requires making a commitment to the issue rather than going into the field as a career move. So someone who goes into it as a career move would focus on moving upwards. You start with an NGO, then you go to the government, then you work for the UN, or you look at how you can go up based on salary. But issue-focused people will see the advantages of touching on different types of work, in working in different spaces from which to affect change, and still keeping their feet on the ground and focused on that commitment on that issue. So it's really important for you to reflect on what type of person you are and what trajectory you take. Like if you had to ask my husband, he was definitely a career path person. He did his MBA, he went to an engineering firm, etc., etc. But in development, if you're coming and working from that passion, it's not necessarily the case. The other thing is also a skill, and I've struggled with a skill, is really patience. And having faith in that this is a journey of discovery. Things usually fall into place and we worry so much about what's going to happen next and what's the next step. But actually, as we make that commitment and we engage, we go from one step forward, then another and another. As Cassandra said, there were all these different pieces that suddenly came together in your work. So really having faith that there is a journey and that it is a gradual process that will come to light. And then also really thinking about what type of development worker you want to be. So for instance, if you want to be a generalist, then really enhancing your skills in terms of like management training. So there's a lot of talk at the moment about results-based management or RBM. And in fact, you can do a free course, a Spur Change free course out at the moment on RBM. Or you can focus on finances or human resources or strategic analysis and monitoring and evaluation. So for instance, I was an academic professor at some point and I actually created a course specifically on monitoring and evaluation because there was such a gap in these hard skills, technical skills. But in other cases, you can also choose to branch off in a specific area, such as environmental law or justice, or in my case, it was child protection and gender-based violence. But often when you enter the development sector, you don't know which route you're going to take. So really be open to the idea that you might want to do your master's at a later point or start your PhD at a later point when you really have decided on what area you're interested in or gain experience in different places. In addition to these so-called technical hard skills that I mentioned, such as research, policy, monitoring, and evaluation, which have all been very important for my work, having language skills are extremely important. And this has been a huge barrier for me. So growing up in South Africa, I wasn't exposed to French. We weren't exposed to international languages. And yet when you apply to work at the United Nations, or if you apply to work for the Canadian federal government, you need to be able to show that you have a second language and you're able to pass various tests and go through various interviews in another language. So if you've got any free time now, I would carve out that time to learn French, learn Spanish, learn another international language. It'll really help you in the long run. In addition, there are other skills that have been very important for my work, such as relationship building. So being able to share knowledge and lessons from a very humble, and I'm going to keep emphasizing the word humble, and appreciative lens. Having a PhD, there's always this idea that you're supposed to put yourself as an expert on a specific subject. But as Taylor has said, those living in a local context are the experts. So we have to be humble in that regard. And with that, you require certain intercultural communication skills that support relationship building. And I work with very diverse stakeholders every day, and I've worked with diverse communities in Mozambique, Liberia, Romania, Bulgaria, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, etc. And you need to be able to come at the different projects and work with the local communities in a position of trust, reciprocal relationships, while promoting respect, promoting local ownership. And this requires a number of skills, but at its heart, it requires listening, being able to listen to what challenges people are facing and how they're overcoming them, and what you can learn from them when thinking about the projects you're going to develop. The second thing that more and more I've realized in my career is developing skills on consensus building. So if you're thinking about your own lives, I know I've got 2 kids, and they're constantly fighting over everything. Nothing is fair. They're always on a, and really developing those skills of how do you find that common ground when there are such oppositional interests. And at BCCIC, I've convened and participated in many multi-stakeholder platforms. I've conducted research on multi-stakeholder platforms. I've produced publications and policy briefs. And really this idea of how do we reach consensus? How do we find the common ground to solve wicked problems is fundamental to moving development forward. And this is something, as I said, you can practice in your day-to-day life. The other thing I would really like to emphasize at this point in terms of a skill is critical thinking. And more, we're beginning to use the buzzword decolonial lenses. And decolonial lens, I say it's a buzzword in that many people don't really engage with what it means. Many people don't understand what it means, and yet they're tagging it onto their development project. But as a skill, it requires a degree of analysis. So reflecting on the root causes of society's problems, reflecting on the root causes of social injustice, colonial causes, patriarchal, capitalist, and how they intersect. Being able to contextualize development problems within very historicized structures. So looking at the historical roots. And also reflecting on how international development is perpetuating inequalities and systems of oppression today. Just the language that we use, the terminology, just the buzzwords that we throw out all the time, how it perpetuates these inequalities, how rules around funding and the frameworks that attach to funding perpetuate inequalities. So just going back to my first point, I think an important skill is not only the ability to translate passion and commitment, but making a commitment to reflect on why and how we are doing our work within a sector that has perpetuated inequalities and systems of oppression since its origins. And what this means for you as an individual is being able to be reflexive. And in other words, reflect on how your own background, your own personal biography, your own identity and positionality will shape your assumptions about international development, and will shape your assumptions about what social justice should look like, and how it will affect all the work you do and the relationships you enter into. So for this reason, this is why I specifically spoke about my childhood under apartheid in South Africa, because it has been a very formative experience in the terms of the way in which I consider relations of inequality and how I consider social systems of oppression and how people respond. Thank you. Sorry, I just went on for a little bit of a long time, but I'm passing it back over to you.
Thank you, Zasha. Kassan, if you'd like to go.
Sure. I feel like Sasha covered a lot of things that I wanted to say, so I'll be brief because it really resonates with the same things I was going to suggest. So I really like this idea of, like, you know, the interest, you know, is your drive, right? So that has to lead where you're going and your decision making ultimately. And the skills is kind of like your tool set, right? So it's the more practical stuff that you'll be using and you know, growing, and that will serve your purpose. So so the first thing that came to mind in terms of and I'm going to go more at the practical level, is definitely like writing skills. I think that's oftentimes overlooked, but all my life I feel like writing skills in you know, whatever language is really key, whether it's preparing presentations, developing educational materials. Grant writing is also a big part of, like, if you're working for an NGO, so that's a good skill to have. Everyone's looking, you know, for funds. So I do believe that improving your writing skills could definitely be something that could lead you very far. If you're not interested in writing, then communication skills in general. So, maybe expressing yourself orally. This is a big basket, right? But networking skills is also really key. Connecting with people. HR skills. I don't mean human rights, I mean, human resource at this point. So, your relations with your colleagues, with your partners. A lot of the work that I did was related to partnership development, whether it's for funding or for just, expanding programs. And a lot of it had to do with communication, being able to connect with the person you're talking to on a personal level as well, right? So that was very, very important. And again, like in terms of the interest being the drive, believing in what you communicate, right? It doesn't make sense. And people will experience this if you're trying to promote or build something, but you're not believing in the mission of your organization. So that's definitely, that doesn't work, right? So those are important. Intercultural skills, like Sasha mentioned as well. So, being aware of yourself and whomever you're speaking to, right, where they're coming from and their language, and being able to listen is very, very key. Like, we talk a lot, but sometimes you just have to really listen to what people are telling you. So again, another important skill she mentions as well is language skills. So I really think that the fact that I speak French, English, and Spanish, it really led me to jobs that that I had throughout my career. For Equitas, for my internships, like the fact that I was trilingual was actually really useful. Even my current job right now, I would say like 60% of my work, I do it in Spanish with all my Central American counterparts and colleagues. So I'm using it like every day. For the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, it was based in Ottawa. Obviously, speaking French and English was very important. So that led me to, that was very useful. I also, but I have a personal interest in languages, so that really helps. So again, it wasn't too difficult for me. I was able to learn a little bit of Atskamik language as well, which is a First Nation language back east, and just being able to say greetings in the local language has always been very helpful, right? It's you're opening up to you're making the effort basically, right? So yeah, language skills. Being detail oriented and being able to synthesize as well, to summarize, like that's very important. I'm just going to go down the list. I don't have much time. So again, like if you don't have a specialization, if you're not a lawyer, if you're not this or that, well, I did a master's in management, and it was a trilingual program, and that brought me a lot. Like I did it with the idea of applying it to NGO work, even though it was purely business oriented, but learning about marketing, communications, HR, accounting, finance, like all these things are applicable in an NGO world, right? So that was quite useful in terms of like hard skills. Monitoring and evaluation, like Sasha said, I'm being very real here. Like this is the business, especially Canadian organizations, like knowing monitoring and evaluation, results-based management for Global Affairs Canada, which is one of the main funders for Canadian-based NGOs, is useful on a everyday level. What else? Yeah, research skills. Be curious. Get involved. Be curious, get involved. So do your research. I think if you put in the extra work now, it's going to reward you later. So I would leave it at that.
Thank you for that. And Taylor, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, you both have covered so much. I can just kind of reiterate some similar points, but I guess from my personal experience being a GDS alumni, learning about global development, it's so broad. There are so many different niches and opportunities. So for me, I really just explored kind of everything. So if you can join the different clubs at UFE, research different things, try to get involved in different opportunities, because for me, it's different to really learn about the things, but to get involved in them really helps to shape what your passions are. And then you can really develop those skills based off your passions. And really kind of hone into things. I guess for me, important skills for my work that I do now is definitely critical thinking. So being able to do the day-to-day task, because that's important, but you can kind of get stuck in that and you can get complacent in the work that you're doing. So being able to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and kind of break it down into chunks is really important, because you're going to be doing different kinds of work. And that is a good skill to have, especially relationship building and networking. That is a really big piece, especially knowing how to listen and to learn, because a lot of the work that you will be doing in social justice contexts are like mine. You're learning. So I'm learning from context experts and learning how to apply that into policy and shape that into advocacy for programs, and looking at how we can translate that into advocacy for the provincial level and federal government. So it's also kind of knowing the systems that you're going to be working in and with, because unfortunately bureaucratic systems are slow and they can be frustrating. So patience is something else as well. Definitely seeking opportunities where you can get involved in and get those tangible firsthand experiences. Having skills around evaluation is really important as well. This is kind of a niche that we're seeing within the global development context that is kind of underserved. And it's a really important skill to have, because you're able to look at your goals and missions and really break them down into objectives on a daily basis, a monthly basis, or something like that, and to really meet community needs. It's different the way that you can shape evaluation. So it can be really interesting. And I guess just being able to kind of immerse yourself and be able to try and try again. It's definitely working in a social justice context. Everything's changing on a daily basis, so it's being able to be adaptable is something as well, because things change. But I would definitely say language skills is important as well, especially in the local and international context. So having those language skills is really important, especially for relationship building, because when you're working in diverse communities, a lot of people would prefer to communicate in their first language rather than a second language. So many skills and diverse sets of things. I definitely think networking, getting involved with your professors, like asking them questions, saying, how can I get involved in this? Do you know any of these projects? The Global Development Department was really great in that, where you were able to pick a lot of the professors' brains, and a lot of them are willing to give you time if you're interested, because they really want to foster your career and really help with that. So thank you.
Thank you, Taylor, and everyone. I have a long list of skills to work on strengthening now. So now moving on to our last question. What advice do you have for students who are finishing undergraduate degrees and who are interested in starting careers with social justice and global development sector organizations? And how can they look for these opportunities? Sasha, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Holly, for that question. So I'm just going to build on what Taylor was saying. So just focusing on practical advice. So I have been working with young people throughout my career, and now in BCCIC, I have been very, very grateful to have been working with youth volunteers, youth practicum students like yourself, as well as coordinating and supporting our youth-led climate change branch, and participating in a number of several other youth engagement activities. So I reached out to my colleagues, and I reached out to some of the youth that I work with to see what practical advice they offer. So I'm just going to highlight some of the points that they raised. And no, it's really fascinating because everyone has different advice. And this is also the important point about humility. Simply because I have been in this field for over 20 years, I do not have all the answers. So it is important to reach out and consult with others. So first level, so it's time to build relationships now. So become an individual member of BCCIC, for instance, only costs around $30, but you have access to all the capacity development webinars. You have access to networking opportunities to meet other members and so forth. Or find another network organization where you will be able to build these relationships that Kaylin was talking about. And when you're offered opportunities to join working groups or workshops, take advantage of them. Lean on the network, ask questions, offer support, engage in conversations, show up beyond simply being a body in the room. And I'd be very grateful, for instance, Sebastian Manshaw is another one of another UFV practicum student I have been working with and I'm still working with, as well as Holly, where when they started their practicums with BCCIC, they got actively involved, asked to take on additional responsibilities, participated actively in discussions. So even though you're a student, it might feel scary it's difficult to think that your voice matters or that you've got anything valuable to contribute, but you do. And you're learning cutting edge knowledge in school and you've got very diverse perspectives. So you really need to use that opportunity to share it. The other thing about volunteering at different organizations, not just about building your skill sets, but it's also about using the opportunity to try and find out what interests you the most. Just going back to my earlier point about letting the passion and the interest drive your career. So by doing internships and volunteer positions or short-term co-ops, you need to be willing to learn anything. So try out different activities that you might not have experience with. So for instance, I know that when Holly came on board, she didn't have much experience in communication or even coordinating delegations. But in the end, she, I would say in many respects, have become an expert simply by gaining and working and getting the practical hands-on experience. So these are learning experiences and you'll be thankful for them later. Another interesting piece of advice comes from my colleague Laurel. If you have a hobby you are passionate about, use it to craft and practice the skills you need for your future career. So for example, if you've got a hobby, create an Instagram or blog page, sell crafts that you make or make a website for your hobby. And she's really into food and she used that when she started her career just to get communications experience. So in other words, find ways to expand your skills while doing something that you love. So school and grades are important to a certain point. I mean, we have no doubt about that. But the Canadian workforce, no one really looks at your grades. You need to really focus on the skills and how you've tied them to your passion. And the other thing to note is that just don't be afraid to take risks or to make mistakes. I think it's important to know that we will all make mistakes. We'll never get it fully right, and there'll be times when we feel uncomfortable. But it's for that reason that we must continue doing the hard work. And it's better to push ourselves and fail, and then to learn, versus not putting ourselves out there at all. Also, don't be afraid to start your own thing or do your own thing. So create opportunities with other youth or on your own. I'd like to highlight, for instance, the work of Threading Change. Sophia Yang was a youth volunteering at BCCIC. She then joined together with a few other youth and they've created this incredible organization that looks at sustainable fashion. It's really these just taking the initiative, I just think it's just very, very powerful. And we've got like a climate change branch of nearly 40 volunteers who started out with this passion and interest, and they approached BCCIC with an idea. And then just lastly, if when you're applying for jobs, be very reflexive and very humble in your approach. I know there was a UFV student who reached out to me earlier in the year after I delivered a presentation and who wrote to me just about his personal background and some of the dilemmas that he's worrying about in relation to position and privilege. And that for me was really, really powerful. And I wanted to take him on and work with him because he was able to be reflexive. And before I hand over back to you, Holly, I just some advice to my younger self, because I didn't answer this question earlier on. Sometimes something doesn't work out for something much better to happen. There were points throughout my career where I was just thrown completely by disappointment. You know, I applied, I had experience, and just things didn't work out. And in fact, them not working out led to better opportunities. The other thing is sometimes something feels significant in the moment, and oftentimes it's a non-issue. So we might get caught up on a day-to-day basis when you're a volunteer or practicum student, really worrying about small things when actually they're not. 20 years down the line, you won't remember them. And your age does not define your worth. Regardless of the age, you have so much to offer. I remember I started my first job in Sri Lanka when I was like 24 years old. And I was so hyper conscious of my age being so young. I never felt like I was good enough. And in fact, it doesn't matter. I brought a wealth of knowledge and experience based on my research, my PhD, and so forth. And half the time, nobody knows what they're doing. So we all have this imposter syndrome. You know, there are so many times when even to this day now, I enter a room or I sign onto a webinar where I feel that I do not belong, or I do not have the right experience, or I don't have the right accent, or I don't have the right way of dressing. You know, I still agonize over what shirt I'm going to wear, or I don't have the right way of talking. But just remember, everyone feels that way. So it's a matter of like putting on a brave face, showing humility, but also gaining strength from the unique experience that you bring to the table. And then lastly, although our careers define us in many respects, they are less than half of our lives. So really make sure you have fun. And I went from masters to PhD to consultancies to jobs. I never took a year off. I never took time just to be and explore my interests. And I know this is a career seminar and I should be encouraging you to like embark on your careers. Also take time to carve out spaces for yourself in that process and in that journey. Thanks, Annie. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sasha. Kassan, you can go ahead.
All right, thank you. Yeah, maybe just to comment on what Sasha was saying, like, I really believe that like each experience you have really like shapes you and your future, and you can use every experience, good or bad, you know, or neutral or whatever, will always, you know, you can always frame it as almost a learning experience, right? So, and yeah, we talk about the positive things, but just so you know, just on a personal level, before working at Justice Education Society, I started working when COVID hit, but I moved from Ottawa to Vancouver, and I was 6 months without a job. So, you know, I was on EI, and, you know, it was a hard time, but I think many people go through those type of phases, and, you know, don't let those things discourage you. Like, we all go through hardships in lives, and, you know, that's okay. It's part of the learning experience. So, okay, going back to how to seek for opportunities. Well, obviously, get involved now, seek opportunities. There's so many things out there. Like, there's so many networks, youth groups, volunteer works. Join BCCIC. It's great. We're a part of the network. We love BCCIC. Very active. The Canadian Commission for UNESCO has a youth group as well. You can look that up. There's so many great organizations that are in BC that are, you know, doing fantastic work. Just you know, do some research and you'll find something. And also, like, these COVID times also bring some new opportunities, right? You can work remotely for international organizations now. So there's more like digital or remote opportunities available, I feel, at the moment. So that can be great if you're not willing to travel or to leave right now your home. And yeah, anything can be good on the CV, right? It's all about the way you present yourself and that experience. People will get that. So yeah, and get out of your comfort zone every once in a while. I think those are the moments where you can grow significantly as well. Get involved in your local communities as well. Like, I've always been involved locally, and that really brought me a lot, even for international work. So another thing, internships, I think, are really important, especially in this field of work. So, you know, Equitas led me to working to my other internship in Ganawage. I wouldn't have worked at Wapikoni if I didn't have the Ganawage internship. I feel, you know, and I wouldn't have worked at CIS UNESCO if I hadn't worked at Wapikoni. So it all sort of, I feel these are like significant. They were significant in my life. And I did another internship also after my master's in Spain for 6 months. And, you know, even though it was in the private sector, which actually helped determine that I definitely did not want to work in the private sector, it still was an interesting experience because it was an international experience. It was completely in Spanish. So I did learn from that, and I still can apply some skills that I learned from that internship now. So do internships. Knowing how to apply for a job is also key. Like, look at your dream job, you know, look at the requirements, and that will, you know, give you an idea of like some ideas of what paths, you know, you may want to take. You know, it's not set in stone, but I think that's, you know, knowing how to apply for a job is key, right? So look at that. Networking, like Sasha mentioned, obviously is very, very important. So seek out those connections, build and maintain your networks as well. I think I got this job also because I was told, amazing references. Why I had amazing references? I still have connections with, even from my internships and my previous jobs, I'm still in contact with those people. And I still ask them for advice. So, and people love to give advice. So don't feel bad to reach out to people that you know, on LinkedIn, via email, whatever. Like, people love giving advice. Find some mentors out there that can help you out. I feel that was very, very useful. What else? Get international experience if you can, if you're able to travel. Like, that is obviously good. If you can't, maybe a multilingual experience is also relevant. And also, like, not everyone will work in international development. So it's okay if you want to, maybe if you're thinking about going to law or continuing your studies, like that's fine too. You can get an expertise in, or go into political administration or public relations or law, or I don't know. There'll always be a need for accountants, you know what I mean, in NGOs. So you can look at other paths as well. And like Sasha said, I think I would end with, we're all persons. We have our family and our private lives. So pursue other stuff too, if you can, like arts and sports and other things. It's not just about the work, it's about your life as well. So try to be balanced in your career and what you do on the side as well. So, because it shapes you at the end of the day too. So.
Thank you, Kassan, and thank you all for your honesty in these answers. It's really powerful. Taylor, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I can just touch off what Cassandra said. Definitely looking, like, how to apply for a job is important, but also don't be afraid to apply for a job. Like, job descriptions can be intimidating, and it's usually the language and things like that. So don't be afraid to apply. You never know if you're going to get the job. And if you get an opportunity for the interview, that is where you can really sell yourself and sell your passion and your eagerness for the role, because at the end of the day, they will look for someone who is passionate to be the change maker and to help with things. So that is something that is also important to note. And yeah, really just ask for help when you need it. I know when I first started with this role, it was a new role. I didn't know how to start a food council. It was just really consulting with people who have done the work before. A lot of people are willing to give you 5-10 minutes or more of their time to share how they dealt with the process, how they got their tips, tricks, that kind of thing. People are really connected within your network, and people just really want to see you succeed and see programming succeed. So really just don't be afraid to ask for help and to share your opinions. Your opinions are valuable to have in the work that you're doing. It's really good to have. I would definitely say having volunteer experience or those international internships is big. I know right now international travel isn't the easiest thing. So at the start of COVID, I had to do the virtual internship, but you still gain that cross-cultural experience, working in different time zones, meeting with different people, learning about different issues within those different localities that you'll be working. So there still are opportunities for international experience, even though it could be on a screen, which is really interesting given our time and technology and things like that. And yeah, don't be afraid. I know it can be really discouraging if you're not getting international work, but there are different things that you can take from that global aspect and look at it locally, especially with food security. There is a lot within the Global South and other countries, but even here in Canada, 1 in 8 individuals are experiencing food insecurity. And that was just in 2018. So it's probably doubled by now with COVID and all the other things happening. But yeah, just really great things to learn from different people. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Taylor. Thanks everybody, all the panelists. Thanks for sharing your insights and your advice with our students. And I can only also reiterate from my own experience how fulfilling working with social justice and global development sector organizations is. I also agree with everyone's advice that you've left us with in terms of not hesitating to ask questions of your professors, ask questions of people that you did a practicum with, ask questions of other alums like Taylor, who's gone on to work with organizations. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Really, people do not mind at all. In fact, I certainly do enjoy getting questions from students. And I think also the other bit too is, what Taylor said is just apply for whatever interests you. Don't hesitate by thinking, that you don't have the skills or, there might be someone more qualified than you. Another piece of advice from me is that doing well in an interview, even in terms of how you put an application together for a job, you get better with time. I would say it's only after doing many of them, maybe like more than 10, you really improve your own skills on how to be good in an interview. So think of it also as just practice for getting that position that you will eventually get. So I think there's enough time. I just wanted to also leave the students with really encouraging them to consider volunteering or interning with organizations such as BCCIC or Archway or JES or so many others. And maybe we've got time, a quick question at the end that came in from a student. Are there any recommendations that any of the panelists have for organizations or nonprofits that they can intern with? So I'll just leave it at that question and let any of the panelists quickly give us a response to that question before we end for today.
I can just quickly say that Archway is always looking for practicum students from different aspects of education. So I have had 2 students from criminal justice. I've had a student from psychology. It just doesn't really matter what your skill set is. There's just so many things to learn. And our food justice program is actively seeking practicum students for the winter semester. So you can talk to Elise and she can help coordinate that for you.
Yeah, same here. Justice Education Society, we're always looking for interns. So don't feel free to reach out to me. Looking for on the international program, obviously, I would say Spanish is a plus. Apply even if you don't speak Spanish, that's fine. I think we would gladly take new interns. We had 2 wonderful interns, thanks to Gitanjali that worked with us, and always looking for more. And like I said, probably my previous, the CC UNESCO might be looking for interns. I know we have worked with interns in the past, so you might want to check that. I think BCCIC, there's like a posting, right? Like, I don't know if there's opportunities there that you can look on the BCCIC website. I think they have like opportunities. So you can start with that maybe.
Yes, Cassandra, I included the link for that posting on the chat. So I'm hoping the students can see the chat. We've just closed our applications for assistant positions. I'd just also like to note, I don't want to open a can of worms now, but we're also rethinking how we engage with volunteers. There are a number of ethical concerns around volunteers, specifically being unable to compensate them adequately for their time and work. And this is something I hope that students in the class feel comfortable advocating for themselves in this regard. And there are a lot of shifts within the sector that students who volunteer should be adequately compensated, either in the format of course credits or in the form of payment per hours or payment per deliverable. But it is something we are thinking about it as a sector, just to ensure that we actually are able to live the same principles that we preach. And it's a hard one, because we know that the students, young people like yourself, are really eager and desperate for the experience, and it does look good on your CV. But we also need to think about the bigger implications of this and the messages we're putting out if we're taking advantage of free labor. Just something to think about.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Zasha, Cassandra, and Taylor. And thank you so much for the students who are attending. Have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.